What's going on, Warriors? Welcome back to another episode from Reach More Recovery. I'm your host, Baron, and today we're going to be talking about how this global pandemic has become a narcissism super-spreader. First and foremost, I got to put a disclaimer out there. This is not going to be a propaganda video. This is not a video to distort or otherwise discredit any of the scientific information we have out there about the virus or the vaccines. On this video, we're strictly going to talk about the unintended and the unwelcome consequence of this global pandemic. See, this mass fear, mass hysteria, mass trauma that's happening is actually fueling an outbreak of narcissism on a global scale. And that's what we're going to jump into in this video. For starters, those of you that don't know anything about narcissism or you're new to this channel, we're going to give a quick definition. So narcissism is an excessive interest or admiration in oneself, an inflated sense of self-importance on a toxic scale. Now, some of the traits associated with it are lack of empathy, impulsivity, grandiosity, little to no remorse, and those are just to name a few. Now, we all have narcissistic traits, but the people that have adopted those traits as their core values, as their core sense of who they are, those are the ones that are clinically diagnosed with NPD, Narcissistic Personality Disorder. So that was a quick rundown. Now that you understand what narcissism is and the varying degrees that exist in every single person, you'll be able to better understand throughout this video how the pandemic is fueling an outbreak of narcissism on a global scale. Just speaking from personal experience, this pandemic has probably been one of the most frightening things that have happened in my life. Now, I'm not downplaying all the other atrocities that have happened over the 36 years I've been on this planet. There's been wars, countless acts of violence, but what I come to realize is that I've been better able to compartmentalize those things and create a false sense of security in my mind. Let's take one of the many wars that happened for an example. I understood the war was dangerous, but I also understood that the war was happening somewhere over there. So I was able to trick my mind into a false sense of security and to believing, well, since I'm not in that location and since I'm not participating in that war, I'm okay. This pandemic was something different. It was an invisible virus spreading around the globe, circumventing any measures to contain it, killing people indiscriminately. If it didn't kill you, it could cause some potential long-term health damages. If you avoided the virus altogether, you still were impacted economically by the shutdowns. It seemed as though there was nothing you could do to escape it. So everyone is being affected. There's a growing fear for our individual health, safety, and wellness, coupled with the mass traumatization of so many deaths just because of this virus. And fear and trauma is a breeding ground for narcissism. Let's take it back to that clinically diagnosed person with narcissistic personality disorder. Most oftentimes, they've had something happen in their childhood, a deep hurt, a deep pain, a deep trauma that caused them to adopt those narcissistic traits as a lifestyle. That's kind of what's happening globally now. We're all going through a deep trauma, and we're not becoming I'm not saying we're all becoming clinically diagnosed narcissistic or NPD people, but what's happening is more of our narcissistic traits are coming to the foreground. So for starters, let's talk about the non-diagnosed people, just the regular old ordinary people that may have some narcissistic traits or tendencies. So what you see happening during this pandemic is that some of those narcissistic traits or tendencies that it had are being elevated or magnified as the fear and the trauma of this pandemic continues. And you can see it happening in a couple different ways. Let's talk about the traits and how they're relevant towards what's happening with everyday people in their lives right now. So let's talk about lack of empathy. Now, I'm not saying that regular people are losing their empathy. When you're constantly exposed to something, whether good or bad, you start to get desensitized towards it. Let me use an example from my weightlifting days. When you're constantly lifting weights or doing something with your hands, and that metal, iron, rubber is constantly rubbing up, irritating, and damaging your skin starts to get callous. And for those of you that don't know, it's just real thick patches of skin that are resistant to the damage from the consistent trauma of those weights. And that's kind of like what's happening now with our everyday people. So with the ongoing trauma and the fear that's persisted for the last year and a half, we're starting to build up calluses emotionally. We're starting to get desensitized to some of the things that are important to us. And if that continues, that desensitization can reach the level of lack of empathy, which is pretty much right there of where that clinically diagnosed narcissist is. Let's look at examples. Look at the healthcare workers. That's the most important example you can look at out there. They've been bombarded with this thing since day one. Hospitals overcrowded. And now we hear the news stories. We see the pictures of doctors that are just tired and beat down. But does it have the same effect? Are we making any difference to improve their way of life, to improve the situation at the hospitals? It just seems like we desensitize to the fact that our care workers need some help. And what's happening is, as the pandemic keeps on going, and as our care workers keep getting worn out, they're losing their desire to serve. And it's not just happening in that area. Look at teachers and service workers. They're going through a similar dilemma. Teachers getting burnt out from the in-class, virtual class, trying to keep up with the both. The students are getting burnt out. Service care workers are getting burnt out from the shortages of staff, as well as the increased number of people that are tired of being cooped up in the house, so they're just bum rushing to restaurants. And you have people critical to the infrastructure of a nation just simply losing desire to serve, losing desire to serve the function that keeps the nation going. So when you have people getting desensitized and they're struggling to get in touch with their empathetic side, but still dealing with that trauma and that fear, then that impulsiveness, that self-servingness is easier to come to the surface. And you see that you saw that with the matter versus supplies. When people thought there would be shortages, it got to a point where all you had to do was whisper shortage in whatever the supply is, and people would run out in masses and buy it up. People were snatching toilet paper off the shelves, taking all the baby diapers, as much as they can carry. They mentioned the supporters on gas. They was filling up the back of the beds of their trucks with tarps, stuff that's not even feasible for long-term preservation. When all that stuff is playing together and you're desensitized, you're looking to do something self-serving, it just became easier to become impulsive, and not only impulsive, but not really factor in or not have remorse for the after effects. There were mothers that were crying in their eyes because they needed diapers and they couldn't find them. Now, let's jump into the second half of this thing. And that's the people that were clinically diagnosed narcissists. When this pandemic hit, it was like a gold rush for them. Now, I know what you're thinking out there. How could they get more narcissistic if they are already narcissists to begin with? Well, let me explain to you. Let me back up what a narcissist does in order to get their supply from another human being. What they do is they slowly indoctrinate a normal person into their abuse cycles. So you don't just start off financially abusing somebody or emotionally abusing somebody. You have to abuse them slowly and let it progressively increase over time to get them to the point where you want them to be. But when this pandemic hit, it was like it sped up that process. So let's talk about financial abuse. Let's use that as an example. So let's say that the narcissist was going to slowly whittle the other person's finances away and make them completely dependent over the course of 5 or 10 years. That was their plan. But then this pandemic hit, people are losing their jobs. There's financial instability. You don't know what's happening next. You don't know when you'll be able to get another job. You don't know how long stimulus packages are going to hold you over for. So essentially what that can do is speed up someone's dependency on another person for their finances. So now a plan that was going to take 5 or 10 years has now happened literally over a couple months. So now that they've gotten to that point, they don't have to slowly go through the process of increasing their abuse. They can just go to the final stage. Another thing happens. The narcissist had the ability to get supply from outside sources. Outside cheating, infidelity, adultery, hurting somebody else, making a waiter cry here or there. They had an opportunity to kind of relieve some of that steam out and about in the world. But when everything shut down, their primary supply, or whoever was in the house with them, they had to get all that abuse out on them. And abuse starts to get stale when you're doing it to the same person. So you either go out and abuse somebody else to get a fresh hit, or you increase the level of abuse that you're giving to that one person that's right there before you. I mean, it's downright diabolical. That's what was happening. And you could see it happen on a global scale because there was increase in the rates of domestic violence, increase in the divorce rates, and sadly to say, increase in the suicide rates. But the narcissist got bigger, badder, and bolder over a shorter amount of time. Essentially, instead of taking off their mask slowly, they were able to rip it off all at once. But this video isn't all doom and gloom, because the vast majority of us have still maintained our sense of self. So when this whole thing is over, when everything starts to level out, so will we. We'll go back to our natural state and we'll be ready to heal the nations. See, what you're gonna have happen is that you'll have people, an army, waiting, ready, and willing to reduce the negative and narcissistic outbreak that's currently taking place. So endure for this time. This message is just to spread awareness so that we can curb that spread of narcissism. But when this is all said and done, we'll keep fighting a good fight and make this world a better place. With that being said, I thank y'all for this time of conversation. If you enjoy the content, please like, even more so, comment and subscribe. I enjoyed the time with y'all. Love y'all, and peace.